Hello everyone, it is time for our live stream. We are, I don't know, live stream 121 or something like that, 122. We've been doing this a while. So I wanted to reach out to you guys and talk about something that we have talked about from time to time. Hi everybody, all the chats showed up at one time. I've had a lot of people over the last, I don't know, year say, why don't you do a video on dinoflagellates? And so let's just kind of talk about what I do know. And that way there is one video they can go to and have this conversation. Dinoflagellates are different from cyanobacteria and different from diatoms. And a lot of times people confuse the three. They see it and they're like, what is it? Diatoms are like a brown dusting that typically occurs on a new tank on the sandbed in the first couple of months. And that is actually a food or a fuel for bacteria to continue to grow. Cyanobacteria is a bacteria, not an algae, even though it's called the red algae, or blue-green algae is the name by the rest of the planet. We call it a red blanket, and a lot of people hate it. But cyanobacteria is just, it's always present in your tank. It's invisible most of the time, but when it appears and turns red, people don't like it and they want it gone, and I understand. And so we've talked about how to get rid of that as well, and there's been a video on that. But short story, just to go into, in other words, brief description, use ChemiClean or Red Cyano RX, wait 3 days. If it isn't gone, treat the tank again, wait another 2 days. By now it's gone, and now you can do a big water change and turn your skimmer back on. But there's a whole thing you can watch that goes into depth. Finally, dinoflagellates is the one that people are most worried about, and it's actually the one that historically has driven people right out of the hobby. They're so frustrated, they just give up. And more people these days are hanging in there. And they just want to beat it because it's just a plague. It's just like having dandelions growing in your yard. It's like, well, do you just get rid of the yard and sell the house, or do you deal with the dandelions? So I understand the desire. It's just really frustrating. So what you would want to do with dinoflagellates is you want to identify it first. And typically it'll appear on the sand, on the rock, even on the glass is possible. I've seen that before, especially on the back, because we never clean that. And it will be bubbly. It will be stringy with bubbles coming off of it. I mean, it's kind of like a weird underworld, like something you'd want to intentionally grow for decor inside a reef bowl that was filled up with brine shrimp, swimming around. It's like this really cool alternate universe. But in our reef tank, it is not cool, and it is not an alternate universe we want. So you've got this bubbly, slimy, stringy stuff that people have compared it to snot. It can be brown. It can be green. Those are the two colors I've seen. And it's toxic to almost everything in your tank. So having a cleanup crew does not help, and odds are if they touch it, they die. Fish aren't going to eat it. There's really no natural predator I'm aware of that consumes dinoflagellates in a reef tank. Now, there may be something somewhere on this planet that, because everything has checks and balances. But this stuff here, it's a real problem in an aquarium because it's a closed ecosystem. I can tell you this, there's certain things you should not do. You should not do water changes. That is the first mistake. Because apparently, whatever's in your new saltwater is the perfect fuel to grow more dinos. So you have to stop doing water changes. There's a few tricks that were recommended a long time ago, and one of the tricks was to keep your pH really high, like 8.5 all the time, which is not easy to do. And odds are will cause your, it can affect some livestock adversely. 8.5 isn't the end of the world, but it's really high. And you could end up, because as you keep buffering to bring it up, you're going to shoot your alkalinity higher and higher and higher. So having 8.5 for like 2 or 3 weeks is kind of really hard to manage. It's not impossible, but it's not a simple thing, and you'd have to test a lot to stay on top of it. If you wanted to enclose your tank with bags or cardboard, and shut off the lights, you can do that. A lot of people think they can do it for 3 days, and that's not long enough. It takes weeks. It's a thing where you're just shutting it down. And I've been in fish stores where they had a tank that was just plagued dinos, and all the lights were off, and it was kind of in the back corner, and you couldn't really see it. And sometimes they wrap it with cardboard, like I said, or sheets of foam or whatever to block the light. And I'm like, what's going on in this tank? And like, we're trying to fight dinos. I'm like, oh. And they will literally let it idle for 2 or 3 weeks until it burns itself out. But in an active reef system full of corals and full of fish, you can't wait for it to burn itself out. And unfortunately, every time you feed the tank or do anything, you're just kind of keeping it alive and present and thriving and happy. So instead, you just can't ignore it and hope for the best. It is definitely something you want to tackle. I've recommended a couple of things in the past. I'm not a huge Dinoflagellates experienced person. I've only had a hint of it in my tanks in the past, and I just dealt with it. For example, I saw it appear in the refugium, but never in the tank. And so I used a ladle and I lowered it in the surface, because it was on the surface like an ugly bubble. And I just lowered a ladle into the water of the refugium, and it went into the spoon, and I dumped the spoon out repeatedly until it was gone. And that was it. And another time I had it on a coral, and I just removed the coral and shook it off and put it back in the tank. And I did that a few times to solve it. That's about the extent of of Dinoflagellates I've ever had to deal with. I've never been hit with this thing. And there could be, I mean, I don't know exactly why it happens to some of you, but I would think there's a possibility or a correlation, because it happens to a lot of people these days, where in the past, some people got it. And now it seems like everyone's getting it. And because of that, I feel like it has to be because people are running tanks with dry rock and dry sand, not using anything. And because they're so worried about pests. And so they're limiting these important key bacteria that we normally would have coming in on live rock. And, I'm a huge proponent of live rock. I always recommend it. And I realize it costs more. And I mean, it costs like 4 times as much. But it's prettier, and there's all kinds of cool stuff on it. And there's probably some pests on it. That's okay. We can fight the pests. But anyway, I'm not trying to tell you switch out your rock. It's too late. You have the Dinoflagellates. So what I would suggest, you don't want to do a water change. But what you can do, stop all the flow in the tank and scrape together as much of it as you can into one area, and remove anything that's removable. Lock line, nozzles, cleaning magnets, frag racks, anything that it's on that's plastic you can remove it. Take it out of the tank and go clean it, and you can put it back in the tank. Just eliminate some of the mass. And then the pile you made, siphon that out and replace what water you did have to suck out. Don't siphon it through a sock to save the water. I just feel like it won't benefit you. I feel like if you suck out 1 or 2 gallons of water out of your tank and you replace that, that's not like a water change, unless your tank's really tiny. And if your tank's really tiny, it might be easier to just reset the darn thing than to keep battling this. But, if you're dealing with a 29 gallon, 55 gallon, 180 gallon or bigger, siphoning out a couple of gallons of water is not it's going to be a blip. You can add the new salt water to replace what you removed. And I would keep siphoning it out on a daily basis. Every bit I found, I would just do it. And I'd be the cleanup crew. And I would recommend you do that for, as long as it takes. It might be a daily thing for a week or 2. And then there's so little left. And I know this sounds kind of like hope, but it's something I've seen with other situations as well. When there's so little left, it can't stay. It's not like, this virus that's hitting the planet. We're so worried if anyone touches anyone, it's going to go to the next person. And with Dinoflagellates, with cyano, with Diatoms, these are things that boom and then collapse. And in the case of you removing so much of it, it doesn't have the energy, because you keep disrupting its energy. And you're able to get it out. Now, what are some chemicals you can use to fight Dinoflagellates? One of the first ones that I came across was, in the beginning it was kalkwasser, because kalkwasser would help bring your pH even higher. But in recent years, like about 5 years ago, I'd say, one person was suggesting using hydrogen peroxide. And he was suggesting 1 milliliter per 10 gallons of water. And you put in that much every single day for 8 days in a row, and that would eliminate them. And that has worked for some people. It worked for me. I did that in my own tank, and I had no surprises and no upsets, no losses. Others tried it at 2 milliliters per 10 gallons. Others at 3 milliliters per 10 gallons and didn't have any luck. I am thinking that the ones that didn't have any luck possibly had so much of it that there just wasn't enough peroxide to fight it. So again, I'm back to the remove as much as you can manually so that you can handle the last of it. Just like I talk about green hair algae, you pull out all you can, and then whatever little bit is left behind, you put in a brand new cleanup crew and they eat the last of it. Same principle. So if you could try that, you might find some success. There's a product by Fauna Marin that I've heard of, I've never used, called Dino X, and I believe it's a 3-week period. I have suggested that Live Rock Enhance could possibly be used as a competing bacteria in your tank to outcompete what little bit of dino is left in your tank. And so, and some people said that it was working for them. Others, didn't have any luck. I was hoping. I mean, it's not sold as dinoflagellate cure, but it's a new bacteria that, or I'm sorry, it's well, it is a new bacteria to your tank to combat or to compete the existing bacteria. You're adding this bacteria that consumes waste. And I don't know that dinoflagellates are exactly considered waste bacteria, but it seems to work for a few people. And it was a theory I had, and it seems like it may be true, but again, it comes down to each tank has its own situation. But I would hope that things like the Peroxide, Dino-X, Live Rock Enhance are different things you can throw at it to kind of reduce the problem. But doing constant water changes won't help. Taking your skimmer offline or putting it online, that's not going to help. Running carbon's not going to help. Adding an air stone doesn't help. These are a lot of things we try to do. Or I'll tell you this, putting in something like ChemiClean or ChemiPure Blue, all these other, ClearFX Pro, they're not going to touch this stuff. They're not designed for that. And when people throw in a chemical made for something totally different into a scenario like dinoflagellates, I don't know. I'm not saying it's going to turn the dinoflagellates into a superbug, but you'll sit there and say, well, I did this and nothing good happened. It's like, well, it was because that's for cyano. It's not for dinoflagellates. And okay, so one thing I probably should have said in the beginning was you need to know what you're looking at in the first place, and I described it, but I didn't tell you, turn on your white lights. So many of you look at everything under blue and you can't see anything. You've got to have white light. When you're working on your car and you lift the hood, do you grab your blue LED flashlight to look at the situation, or do you grab a white light so you can see what the heck is going on? Don't fear the white lights. You guys have all these LEDs with the technology to change spectrums on a dime, and you're not changing the spectrum whatsoever. You take a picture, it's blurry, it's blue, and you say, what is this? And I'm like, I don't know, it's blue. So, you've got to take the time to switch your lights to white, observe the tank all day long, check on it in the morning, check on the afternoon, check on it in the evening, check on it late at night, see what it's doing with white light. And that way you can kind of isolate. As a matter of fact, you might be able to see the stuff easier to remove it too. And then, later on, when things are back to normal, you can go back to your blue light. But, there's nothing wrong with white light. I just talked with my buddy and I said, hey, what's the topic du jour for you? And he's like, oh my God, these people with their blue lights never turn on the whites. And I was like, well, I can't talk about that for 45 minutes. But no, I always recommend that you run white lights for at least an hour and a half or 2 hours on your tank every day for growth. And then you can use the blue for color. So I do highly recommend that. And those that are debating this, I won't be debated. I just won't argue this because it's not an argument. I go outside into nature, there's white light. When I go scuba diving, when I go snorkeling, it's white light. And I visit the corals, and they're beautiful. And, matter of fact, when we go on to look at corals, when we go diving, they are not the beautiful, vivid colors of the corals you see that you want to buy. And people in the diving community kind of joke, say, hey, do you need a blue flashlight? So you can hit that thing and go, whoa, that is pretty. And because that's not what it looks like in nature. And there's people out there really promoting that blue is the way to go. Blue is pretty. Blue sells corals. Blue makes your tank look great. If you have a guest come over and you give them the orange glasses, they're like, oh my God, because we like to impress. But reality is that's not what they look like in reality. We don't have, that kind of blue filter in our eyeballs. So there's nothing wrong with white light. Please use it. And now you can identify problems in your tank such as dinoflagellates, and you'll be able to look at them. And then, of course, go into Google and type in dinoflagellates and find articles, find pictures. Try to identify if what you see in your tank matches the preponderance of images that are identified as dinoflagellates accurately. That's another problem that a lot of people will, you'd be surprised. You could you could query almost any question on Google. You could put in dandelion, and then you hit search and you go to images, and there'll be the most random stuff that someone somehow identified with a dandelion that's not a dandelion. So just because someone said, oh, this stuff in my tank is a dinoflagellate, but it really isn't, but the other 90 pictures definitely look like dinoflagellates, try to understand which is which so you don't get misled. I had the same problem with Spock. My friend Lori said, I thought you said she said, you said Spock is a blonde Nassau. When did she change? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I went and Googled to see what kind of Nassau she was. And I found a picture that looked just like her that said blonde Nassau. And I said, and I had the other picture of the other one. And I showed her both, and she says, well, the one on the left is misidentified. I was like, oh. So oops. So apparently the blonde Nassau has this orange stripe on its back, and Spock has a black stripe on her back. So it's she's not a blonde. She's just a Nassau. She's just a regular Nassau, but she's a solid 5. So that part's good. What else? That's really everything. So if you tuned in for this video to talk about dinoflagellates, boom, you just got it in less than 20 minutes. I'm pretty impressed. Like I said, I don't have a lot of personal experience with it, so I can't just give you a war story talking about it. I remember years ago, I was at some guy's house, and I cannot find the pictures. I have looked and looked and looked. His tank was phenomenally infested with dinoflagellates. I couldn't believe it, and I said, can I take pictures of this for my website? And he said, yes, and I don't know where the pictures are, because I would love to have that listed on my website so you can say, oh, yeah, that's definitely what I have. But unfortunately, I can't find them, and I haven't found a good tank, that was really loaded up properly that I could stick it on there. Now, what other things can cause dinoflagellates we should discuss as well? It's typically not going to be your food, it's not going to be your salt, and, it's not going to be, the common things we use all the time. More often than not, it's the lack of nutrients, the lack of nitrate, the lack of phosphate. It's just this severely limited system because you're trying to keep it so pure that you're actually hurting yourself, and you're making your job just so much tougher. Where with live rock, you can set up the tank with live rock. You go through a cycle because you have to cycle the tank, and then at that point you can go ahead and put all your livestock in there. And like I said, people used to get dinoflagellates occasionally. Now we see lots of people dealing with it, and back then everyone used live rock, and nowadays most people don't use live rock. So that's why I think there's a correlation. I mentioned this product last. I did a live stream on Tuesday night. I don't know if you guys saw it yet. This is a new kit from Microbacter, or from Brightwell, that's designed for dry rock environments. So if you're starting a tank with dry sand and dry rock, they've made a kit for you that will let you cycle the tank, and apparently you can cycle it in about 8 days instead of like 21. And there's 3 additives inside there. There's ammonia, there's their special Kickstarter Microbacter, and then there was a Microbacter Clean, which is used to kind of keep the uglies out of your tank that you'll use for like the next 2 months. So that kit right there is $30, and I thought, man, that sounds great. It kind of reminds me of when Safety Stop came out. When Safety Stop came to the market, I was walking past a booth at Macna, and they were out there, like, what is this stuff? And she said, it's rapid quarantine. You don't need a quarantine tank. And I was like, what? Because I know no one keeps a quarantine tank. I mean, let's be honest. Most people do not. A lot of people say, I don't have room for it. I don't have the money for it. I don't want to do it. It doesn't work. There's a lot of excuses. So, most people don't have one. And because of that, this product came out to where you could put your fish through a bath, which takes almost 2 hours for the entire process, from the point of acclimation to getting it into your tank. But you knocked off the external parasites, and you're reducing the risk of that brand new fish from the fish store infecting all your fish in your aquarium. So I saw that, and I was like, this is amazing. I am so excited. I hope everyone uses this. And I've been talking about it for 10 years. And I've been recommending it, and I've sold a lot of it. I sell products for my website. I'll put this on the screen real quick. Move my head over. So Safety Stop is 2 parts. One part is formalin. The other part is methylene blue. And each part is used with a gallon of your tank water. The fish is put in there with an air stone and a heater to keep the temperature up, stable. And the fish is in there for 45 minutes. And then you move it to part 2. You do it again for 45 minutes, and then at that point, it's ready. And look, if you want to be super cautious, and there's nothing wrong with that, then your next step would be to put it inside your quarantine tank. You've knocked off the external parasites, the fish is healthier, and you put it in the quarantine tank for observation for a few weeks, and you teach it the foods that you normally buy. It eats, it gets fatter and healthier, and then you finally move it into your tank severely less stressed than it was out of a brand new bag from the fish store. So I thought that's a brilliant idea. This stuff here is the same kind of concept. It's something new that should help your reef tank get established more quickly and kind of get those bacteria in there. And I just thought, well, so many people are starting their tanks with zero, with non-live sand, with non-live rock, it's all dry. So here's something to really seed the rock work. If you don't want to use this is $30. Another choice you could use would be Live Rock Enhance that I mentioned earlier in the stream, talking about, let me move this over a little bit if I can. Live Rock Enhance is a decay-eating bacteria, but it can also be used for curing live rock, and it can be used for putting bacteria in your system. That's another one. And then Reef Enhance is a type of food that makes, if you like all the little bugs running around in your tank, it makes more of them. And you can have tons of pods running around, which is great for those of you that have fish that need to eat pods to live, like a mandarin. And then finally, this Benereef makes Benepet, or Benepets makes Benereef. And so I have these 3 different size jars here. And these are a type of food that you can use for broadcast feeding or for direct feeding to your animals by mixing it up in a slurry and taking a turkey baster or a syringe to squirt it toward them. This one here does have bacteria in it as well. You're supposed to mix it up in some water and let it sit for 5 minutes to activate, and then you put it in your tank. So these are some things you might want to use in your tank that could help with populating the bacteria levels to compete or to avoid dinoflagellates in your tank. It's not an absolute guarantee, but it definitely will help, and it gets you on the right track. I've got a buddy that lives down in Austin, and he updates me constantly on what he's doing with his tank, and he'll tell me how he's got his nitrates at 2, and he's got his phosphate at 0.05 ppm, and he said, I'm still having to dose a little bit of nitrate. I have to dose a little phosphate, and I mean, he's so meticulous. He's like a mad scientist with it. He wants it to be exactly certain ways, and he wants all his graphs to look like straight lines instead of, a roller coaster or a mountain range. And he's been watching a lot of coral growth, which is really happy. Makes him really happy, and I totally agree with that. We want that. So that's what I have to say about dinoflagellates. And I think that if you can, and then once you've gotten rid of them, you can start doing your water changes. You don't have to fear that a water change will bring it back. It won't. Once you've gotten rid of them out of your tank, everything goes back to normal. You run carbon like usual. You will run your skimmer like usual. You do your water changes. You can add your additives that you like to use, whether it's amino acids or it's live foods that you get from the fish store or phytoplankton or anything like that. But during the infestation of the dinoflagellates that are taking over your tank, everything's fueling it. Light's fueling it, food's fueling it, water changes are fueling it, and it's a real battle. So, if you have it, I hope for your sake that you can beat it so you can have a nice, pretty tank and you can be happy and not be overly frustrated. Okay. I'm drinking out of this mug one time for Antonio because he sent it to me. So that's the guys that 3D print the parts, like my nozzles over here. The 3D printed nozzles that are called random flow generators. And makes coffee taste good. Okay, what else? News-wise, we'll drop into this just for a second. I have no idea what's going to happen in the United States regards to releasing people back to normal lives. There's been discussion by the government to possibly open up everything back to normal after Easter, and I think that's way too soon. But there's others that cannot wait. So we'll just have to see. I'm not an introvert. I have no problem being out in public and talking to total strangers. Doesn't bother me a bit. But if I have to stay home or I'm staying in here, I have no problem with that. I like it here. It's nice. I have a TV, I have the internet, I have a tank. I don't need to leave. As long as there's food and power and AC, I'm okay. But some are going stir crazy and some are going out and about into the public, and got to be careful. Right now, we're right at the cusp of globally 650,000 people are infected. So, I know it's a small number compared to 7 billion, but the charge is going up, and we're trying to flatten the curve, not do that. So, be careful. I had to run a couple of errands yesterday. I had to go get packing materials to ship products, and I had to order it over the phone, pay for it over the phone, and then call them when I arrived at their facility so they could put it outside the building for me to pick up. So I didn't even go in. And then I went by the bank to make a deposit, and the bank was closed, which I thought was weird because Friday is payday for most people. And even if you're laid off recently, you should be getting a check still. You know, there's always like one check still going. And the bank said lobby's closed at 4. So I went through drive-through. Drive-through was closed. I was like, really? So I used the ATM. And the ATM was happy to gobble it up. And then it didn't even give me a receipt. I'm like, okay, that's just great. But hopefully it'll be fine. And then, you know, try not to touch your face as much as I do. I apologize, world. I can't stop. And wash your hands a lot. So that's my advice on that. Club Milos Reef is a great group that I want to let you guys know about. This group has been around now for about a year and a half. We have over 7,000 members. We're very, very strict that you have to be nice. And if you can be nice, you're going to love it. And you can feel comfortable to ask your questions and ask for critter ID and ask for you know, advice on how to set something up or change something or correct something. Or you can just show off your system. We love to see your tank. We like to see the livestock you got, your favorite fish, you know, the exponential growth that you got from this one coral, this certain type of food you like. We don't mind. I mean, that's nice to know. We all want to know how everything ticks, and we like to get inspiration from each other. Someone mentioned to me, he sent me a private message actually. He said, you mentioned one of your live streams how you always like to oversize the stand bigger than the aquarium. And, you know, and he said, that's actually what I did. I made my stand to where I have 6 inches on each end and 6 inches along the front, and I can put things down around my tank when I'm working in there. Like, that's exactly what I meant. It's so nice to have that horseshoe of lumber to put things down on. And, you know, you can decorate it a little bit if you want, but if you're doing a water test, it's nice to put your kit down. If you are drinking a beverage and you want to put your drink down, or if you need to have tongs and glue and putty nearby, you've got this work area right in front of your aquarium instead of just a smooth drop-off with nowhere to put anything down. So, you know, if you're able and you have the room, you want to do that. You want to make sure your stand is strong. So because the tank isn't on the 4 corners now, it's kind of inset. But you could even make that outer area either a facade because it's not bearing any weight, or you can actually have like an upper deck with like crown molding underneath it to support it, you know, at that 45-degree angle and the board sitting there. Because, like I said, you're only putting things on there weigh a pound or 2. Now, if you're going to stand on it because you're trying to really get into your tank, you better make sure that construction is well done. So that's that. A quick update on the algae turf scrubber from Foursquare Aquatics. I have been looking into it each day. I go in there and I inspect it. Whoops. Trying to turn things off here. There we go. I pull the drawer out and I look, and it's got a little bit of stuff growing on it. Here, I'll show you guys probably a blue picture. Trying to remember what I did here. Yeah, because it was late last night. But here is, turn it sideways so it's a little bit bigger. You can see it's starting to grow some algae right there. There's actually some hair algae in there, and it's a little green. And then way down to the bottom, I think there's one more picture. You can see a little bit is happening down here in the bottom corner. So it's getting there. It's just going to take a while because I didn't seed it like Jason told me to do. But it's getting there. And so when people say to me, hey, did the nitrates come down yet? Did your refugium die off? Like, it's way too soon. You know, this is like an 8 to 12 week project of it really kicking in. And then we can see if the magic happens that has been promised and predicted. That would be great. I would love that. All right. Switching mugs. What I did was I overheated this coffee and I put a ceramic tile on top to keep it hot. Tired of drinking cold coffee during the stream. Some of you want me to drink liquor instead of coffee. They say I'm more fun that way, but you know. I still have things to do after the stream is over, so liquoring up this time of day isn't ideal for me. All right, I would love to answer some of your questions. So what I want to remind you is that if you ask a question, please put @MeLovesReef. And it looks like this. Some people put all kinds of crazy stuff. So if you can put that in there, that would, and then ask your question, I will see it more easily because there's a lot of conversation in here. And that way, because I had one person say, you have not answered me for 2 weeks in a row. I was like, I didn't see it. Are you using @MeLovesReef? Because that's kind of what I'm doing to quickly scroll through and find stuff. All right. Let's see. Okay. So Fish Guy said, whoops, I'll put it on the screen. I upped my nighttime flow and turned it to lagoon instead of constant, and my Duncan immediately added a bud the next day. I also looked at an old video and some corals definitely look bigger. So yes, you've been having some nice growth. That's great. And yeah, a little bit more flow is nice inside an aquarium. So thanks for the feedback. Because we had talked about that previously, how things weren't quite doing what he was expecting. So I just suggested more flow. Alex says, how are your dwarf golden eels? They are long gone. Quick story about those was that I had two. I brought them home on an airplane, and I put them in the tank, and they lived down in the bottom of the tank. And they were awesome, and I fed them, and they were really fun, and they were obviously paired up. It was really cool. One was slightly larger than the other, and they were always next to each other, and then one would swim up, the other stayed down low and would come down. But it was so rare that it ever like went hunting. It just kind of went up and got the food and retracted. And I had this acrylic shield around my aquarium to keep it from jumping out. And somebody came over and said, Mark, I need that exact frame for my aquarium. Can you make me one? And I was like, well, just take mine. You're here. And I'll make myself another one. And then I didn't make it because I thought these eels never come to the surface. Why do I need this stupid thing? It's always in my way. So I didn't do it, and which was stupid. And it ended up that later, I don't know when, months later, but one of the eels was missing. And I found it on the floor under the aquarium, under all the everything, probably a day too late. It was dead. And when that one died, the other one, I guess, missed its mate and refused to eat. And I tried everything to get it to eat, and it wasn't working. And then finally, I was really panicked, and I was going to different vets trying to get help. And one vet in the local area gave me like this huge long feeding tube and said, you have to shove this down its throat and squirt this food in, or whatever he gave me. And I was just like, okay. And so I had it inside the Peacemaker where I could see it, and I was trying to put this tube in, and it was fighting me, and I just couldn't do it. If this was the apocalypse, maybe I could do it, but I just couldn't do it. I felt bad for the eel, and the eel wasn't doing well, but it was really doing everything to get away from the feeding tube. And I just didn't have, I'm not a doctor. Doctors are like, okay, I have no feelings. And they just, I'm shoving this in there and it's going in the stomach. And it's like, okay, can you do that for me, please? But anyway, it did not make it. And so I haven't had eels in that tank ever since. And so that was a few years ago. And then mixing anemones, that is usually not ideal. Now, when I say mixing, okay, if you want to have a monospecies, you can have, a ton of one thing in a tank. You could have a whole bunch of clownfish from the same clutch living together, and they seem to get along really well. You can have a whole bunch of one type of anemone, it does really well. You can have a whole bunch of green star polyps, and it looks really cool. But when you try to mix different things together, that's when things get a little trickier. And while there are lots of different looking bubble tip anemones, can't always put different ones together in the same tank. People have reported that once I added the black widow, these other ones didn't do well, or the black widow started losing its color because of these other ones. I don't know. That's what I've been hearing. Just it's hearsay. It's not really scientific fact. But I mean, you can try things, but you should be ready to act if it's not working out. I had one person say, "Hey, I've got a carpet and a sea bay and a bubble tip in the same tank. What do you think's going to happen?" And I was like, I don't know. I had a feeling that maybe allelopathy would take place in the tank and they'd chemically do warfare between them. But the tank was 6 feet long and they're spread all the way across, end, middle, end, and so far so good, which is great. It's nice to be able to do that. In my case, the big giant sea bay that you guys are used to seeing was in the anemone cube, and it was shriveling down to nothing with all those bubble tips. And so I removed it and put it in this tank, and it completely turned around. And it's weird because it's all the same water. Both tanks go into the same sump, but the sea bay is thriving, and the bubble tips are thriving, and there's no interference between the two. Now, if you were trying to put tube anemones, rock anemones, carpet anemones, sea bays, long tentacles, you start adding all these different weird things into one tank, that probably will not work out long term. Frank, I'll look up your order after the stream, and I can let you know. I am a little bit behind on the acrylic work, but most of the other items have been going out as quickly as I can get them out the door. Getting things from suppliers has been a real problem recently. Even, like for example, my RODI systems that I build, I ordered the parts 2 weeks ago, and I called them yesterday and said, so where's my pallet? And he told me, it'll go out the end of next week. And I was like, oh. It's like, that's not good. So yeah, but everything that's not done yet on my website's marked pending completion. That's how I track it. And then I have this big, I have a spreadsheet, and I keep track of all the orders there. And anything that's yellow needs to be completed. So if you are on that list, you are going to get knocked out. I'm hoping to get a bunch of things done over the weekend and get things shipped out on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. Let's put this on here because someone's offering some advice. So we're talking about the dinoflagellates before. Reef and Chill says, I beat dinoflagellates by skipping water changes, siphoning and manual removal as much as possible of the dinos every single day, feeding heavy, interesting, and feeding reefroids daily to bring up the phosphate. Okay, to get up the nutrients. All right, interesting. Thank you very much for sharing that. So it kind of correlates with what I was saying. Great. I'm glad that worked for you too. Oh, and he also said, and I aimed my power heads at the surface to increase oxygenation. That's interesting. I didn't think about that at all. So increase oxygen. You know what? I forgot to mention something else. And it's not fair to leave it out because some people swear by it. There was a premise that was laughed at by most of the reefing community that you could pump microbubbles into the tank and that the microbubbles would remove the dinoflagellates. And I was one of them. I was like, come on, bubbles, really? But he was talking about super fine bubbles, finer than the bubbles in a protein skimmer. We're talking about just, like dust particles of bubbles. And so my friend Tammy had this huge 800-gallon tank with dinos, and she was doing the microbubbles every single night. She did it, I think, about 8 hours, like, during the night while she was asleep, and pumped the bubbles in. And she took all of her lock line and pointed it straight down to push the bubbles down. And what she said what was happening was that as the bubbles amassed on the dinos, it would lift them off the substrate and they'd go up to the surface and then into the overflow box and be able to be skimmed out or caught in filter socks. And she had to do this for weeks. I mean, it was not quick. It was not a simple thing. But you have to have the ability to make these microscopic bubbles in the first place and then pump them directly into the return pump to push them in the tank. And then the other thing that you have to absolutely watch out for, if you turn all your lock line down like she did, that if there's a power outage, you have to realize your tank will drain to the bottom, to the tips of those lock lines. So if they're pointed down 8 inches, you could drain 8 inches of your tank out in one session and flood the room if your sump isn't big enough. So keep that in mind too when you're trying to make your plans. It might be better to microbubble while you're there to watch the tank, and as soon as you're done bubbling, put the nozzles back to the normal position for the next 16 hours, just to avoid the risk. But yeah, she tried pretty much everything, and it ended up that the microbubbles helped her. So I don't want to leave it out. I still kind of, I don't know, I guess I'm skeptical, but it seems to be working. And there's a group about it on Facebook that's a dinoflagellate support group. So you can Google that and join that group if you're really struggling. Maybe they can give you some advice, and I'm pretty sure they're going to tell you to do the microbubbles. Derby City Reefer says, myself and the entire internet need to know your reaction to the Tiger King documentary. I have not watched it. I have been very, very busy watching Clone Wars on Disney+. So I literally, my TV has been only on Disney Plus all week. And I started with episode 1, season 1, and I'm working my way through. I think I'm at the end of season 2 because there's a lot of episodes. And I'm really enjoying it. So no, I have not gotten on the bandwagon of watching this crazy tiger guy. But hopefully this too will pass. JS says he got his clams. 2 very nice Maximas. Very nice. Yeah, it's nice to have Maximas. That's my favorite clam of all to get. Let's see. Zafish guy is trying to tell Andrea that she hasn't, that they, I don't know if it's a boy or girl, haven't got their Coral magazine yet. That's because I haven't mailed them yet. I have all of them right there and I have all the envelopes. I need to address them all and get them out this week. So I haven't done that yet. That's on me. That's not on Andrea. So we will get that to you. Let's see. Oh, you know what? Okay, so Trevor said, I had dinoflagellates in my daughter's nano tank and I couldn't get rid of them. And I had a brainwave and got a really small internal UV filter, and boom, gone within a week. Yes, UV could be another good weapon to fight dinoflagellates, because anything that's passing through the UV will be killed, including any kind of dinoflagellate bacteria particles. Also, you made me think of something else when you shared that. Oh, there's another thing that's very old school, and I don't even know if you can find it, but it's called a diatom filter. And that is used to polish the water, and it's like a super fine micron filter, and it looks like a jar with a metal thing on top. It's really weird. I saw it in this guy's house, like, where on earth did you find that? That must be from 1980. It says, I love it. And he took it out, or he removed the motor part, and inside was this pleated filter. And then he showed us the pleat, and he kind of unfolded it, and it was like monstrous. I mean, the zigzags were huge, but it was all compressed into this tight wheel, sort of like, I guess, the pleats in an oil filter. And he said that he could run this on his tank and really polish out stuff. So a diatom filter is another trick that could help in the battle of fighting dinoflagellates. See? That's why I love these chats, because you guys remind me of other things that were not included in the original conversation. And then that kind of makes it beneficial to the person that decides to sit through the entire stream, because they might get another nugget of truth further on into the conversation. Let's see. This is fine asks, what do you think about the method Deb from Reef Dudes was just talking about? I didn't hear his video yet. So apparently it's the bubble scrubbing. Give it a shot. Let us know how that works out for you. Odds are it's going to work. And let me pull this off of here. Mr. Reefbuster says, would you recommend running an RO tube from the RODI system into the ATO reservoir to keep it full at all times? If so, how would you set it up, and what kind of redundancy would you implement? I have mine set up from, the RODI system is in the utility room, which is also my pantry. And 25 feet away is my top-off container right down here. And I run tubing from the RO system all the way into that top-off container, and there's a float valve inside the top-off container, and I refill it once a week. So the container uses water every day, uses water, until it's half empty or more, even less in the container. And then I'll turn on the RO system, I let it refill completely, and then I close the line. The reason being is if you tie in the RODI system to constantly top off your top-off container as your top-off container is topping off your tank, in theory, if something goes wrong, you have unstoppable water just moving from vessel to vessel into your sump. And we don't want to do that. So I would recommend to be more manual. And I talked to a guy recently who is local in my area, and he says, Mark, I have mine going into a barrel. And I said, you need a float valve. And he says, well, I've got one. I hooked it up. I'm like, okay. And I said, do you shut it off when you're done? And he's like, no, I want that automated. I always want those full. And I said to him, you really need a cutoff valve in the tubing that goes to the float. So you've got, wherever the RODI system is, you've got this, dang it, I never have it handy, but I had a piece and I dropped it on the floor over there. You have a short piece of RO tubing, well, I mean, you have a length of RO tubing that goes into a float valve, and the float valve is inside your container. Put a cutoff valve right here and close it when the container's full. So the float valve keeps your floor dry, it keeps your spouse happy because you didn't flood the house, and then the cutoff stops it completely and shuts off the RO system. Because he did not do that, because he wanted to automate it only, his unit wasn't actually turning off. It wasn't flooding the room, but it was sending wastewater down the drain nonstop. And he says, I was wondering why my water bill was $450 last month. And I was like, wow, because my water bill is like 65, 70 bucks a month, and I do all of this. And plus I take showers and cook and wash my hands 10,000 times a day. So you want to be very careful not to put yourself at your reef at risk, not to mention harm yourself financially by doing something so automated that it could run awry if things line up perfectly. Murphy's watching and looking for anything he can do to cause chaos in your life. So just refill that reservoir and then shut it off. And then if you do that once a week, even if you're traveling, you can tell your tank sitter, I need you to open this valve and let it run for 6 hours and come back and close that valve, or whatever it is you need. Or you could take the chance and say, you know, when you come in on Thursday, open that valve, and then on Friday, I need you to close it, but something could go wrong during that 24-hour period, and it could be adding water nonstop because 2 things went wrong at once. Or the tank sitter may not remember to turn it off until you finally come home. And like I said, you know, I try to limit the risk of things going wrong. So I would do that. Wow, that's crazy. Richard said, I thought I had dinoflagellates I was fighting. Come to find out that I had electricity bleeding into my tank from a power head and a heater that was killing the bacteria on my live rock. Wow. Yeah, that would do it. Trevor says, I can't get over how fast the coralline algae grows on the side of your tank. You should bottle it and sell it. What I need to do is scrape it off. I cleaned all the glass today on both tanks. Tanks look nice and crisp right now. They're beautiful. And it's always nice to look over the tank like that. Just Another Reef Tank says, I followed your advice of being the cleanup crew for months, pulling out green hair algae during the ugly phase, and no more ugly. Thank you. I'm glad that helped. Nick says, is Vibrant good for green hair algae? I think it is. I haven't used it myself, but I believe it is. Another thing that people have used for green hair algae is Reflux, which is fluconazole. And the only difference between Reflux and other brands is fluconazole in Reflux is a jar of powder, where the other companies are selling you a pill. You have to open up the pill and shake out the powder of each tablet. So this one, you have a little spoon and you have a little vial of dust. Sort of like the test kits we use, has the little vial of powder and a little spoon. So you can use that as well for green hair algae. But really, all you have to do is lower your phosphates, which if you have green hair algae, you have phosphates. Whether your test kit says you do or don't, you do. You got to lower the phosphates in the tank. You got to rip it all out by hand. You got to put in a bunch of hungry cleanup crew. I tell everyone to do that. Let's see. Oh, that's interesting. Ari did that. Says when using Dino X, you need to follow the directions shown online, otherwise it won't work. They said you need to cut down on your light cycle, turn off the skimmer, pull any carbon or poly pads, no water changes. Raise nitrate and phosphate. There's more information here. So pretty much, yeah. That was interesting though, because they said specifically follow the directions online rather than follow the directions on the bottle. So double check and see what's going on between those 2 instruction sheets and see why. That I didn't know. So thank you very much for giving us that input. Perrin says, I was wondering with Benareef coral food how you prepare it and how much you use, and do you target or broadcast? Okay, so I've got the jar. Here's the tiny jar. Tiny jars I think are 20 bucks. And you'll need some kind of a scoop. It's a 1/4 teaspoon per 25 gallons. So if you have a 25, 30 gallon tank, you'll need a 1/4 teaspoon. You just take some tank water, put in the 1/4 teaspoon, stir it and let it sit for 5 minutes, and then you can pour it in the tank. If you want to use less water so it's thicker, like a slurry or like pudding, then you can actually turkey baste it or syringe it towards specific corals. Like if you wanted to target Goniopora, Tubastria, torch, hammer, these different kind of scolies, different corals that have big mouths. They're very slow eaters. I like to broadcast feed. I just like to pour it in the tank and walk away and let everyone snack. I posted some pictures recently on Instagram, which of course they migrate to Facebook, and it was feeding the tank Reef Booster from Prodibio. I don't use it very often because Reef Booster and Coral Vits do something weird to my water that it just annoys me. As it's not a bad thing, but because it annoys me, I don't like using it as much. All the other ones, I can put it in, walk away, nothing changes, and I'm fine. But when I put in Reef Booster and I put in Coral Vits, which Reef Booster is microfood and Coral Vits is vitamins, when you put those in, the water of the tanks going down the drain sounds more like fresh water, you know, noisy, and it takes a while for the skimmer to settle down. And I thought, you know what, I haven't done this in forever. I'm going to go ahead and just put in all 6 additives, you know, And I did, and I knew the skimmer was going to go nuts, and it did. And I dumped out my waste collector, which probably holds 1.5 gallons. I dumped that out 4 times the next day, and I adjusted my skimmer all the way down to its lowest point. And so I basically threw away whatever that was, 6 gallons of water, but I had a whole bunch of salt water, and I just pumped more salt water into the reef to keep the water levels the right height in the sump. But that's the only downside with Reef Booster and Coral, Reef Booster specifically. I think Coral Bits does it too. Those two tend to make my skimmer go a little bonkers. When you're using foods like that, or like you were talking about Benepets, you want to have your skimmer off for probably about an hour. And it would be really nice if you had some kind of a timed device, like a controller, where you can hit a button and it stops the skimmer, and then an hour from now it just turns itself on. While the stuff is still in the system, your protein skimmer won't overflow. It won't, it actually collapses the bubbles inside the skimmer temporarily, but then when the skimmer gets going, it can start to overflow, and you want to make sure it's not making a big mess in your sump, or that it's draining into a waste collector. I highly recommend a waste collector to you guys. I mean, I can't emphasize it enough. It makes your life so much easier. And there's very simple methods. You can use a gallon jug and put it nearby, and you just have the tube from the collection cup go down into that jug, or you can get a functional one that has float switches inside, which is so much better because you want to stop the skimmer when the collector's full. All right. I don't know what's going on in my throat. Might have to give up the live stream today. Let's see. Dan says, how much flake food do you add to your bioload compared to frozen? You've convinced me to feed my fish more than once a day. Now I add flakes early and frozen later. That's how I do it. It's actually pellets in the daytime, or the flakes in the auto feeder, they are kind of flaky. They look like Fruity Pebbles. And I put those in once a day, and then at night I do frozen. I think I can definitely say I feed way heavier with frozen every night. And that's probably why I have phosphate and nitrate, because I like fat fish. Kevin says, help me lower my nitrates and phosphates. Do you still endorse vodka dosing? Thanks for all you do for our hobby. Vodka dosing is great, and yes, I do. I like it. I just haven't done it in forever. I'm trying something new. What I should have done was just gone back to vodka, and just been done with it. But I was wanting to try new products that are on the market and see how they work. So I tried the brick that you put in your sump. I've tried no-pox. Now I'm doing a turf scrubber. I really want to see what will do the job. So I can say it works. I know for a fact vodka dosing works. I did it for about 3 years. And I had really high nitrate, and it took forever. And after forever being 7 long months, and after 7 months, they just dropped like a rock, like overnight. It was the craziest thing ever, because I was like, it still doesn't work. I test the water, it still doesn't work. And then one day it's like, boom, it's like, wait, what? I tested again, it's like, they are down, I can't believe it. I was so excited. So vodka dosing definitely works. You may have some problems with cyanobacteria during vodka dosing, and vodka dosing really isn't much of a phosphate remover. So you'll still need to do something for phosphates. I like Phosphate RX, other people like GFO, so you can choose your weapon of choice for that one. Skinner says, will dosing peroxide harm any inverts such as shrimp or urchins? No, not the amount we're talking about, this 1 milliliter per 10 gallons of water. Nothing happens. It just magically helps the dinos die off. It's weird. But you don't see any change. Now, if you use peroxide differently, like for example, some people use it to get rid of algae on a rock, and they take the rock out of the tank. I've done this. I go to the kitchen sink and I dribble with a syringe the peroxide all over the algae that bothers me. I just kind of like drip it on the algae, sort of like you're dripping acid on it, right? You know, tss, 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 tss. And then after a couple of minutes or so, I then take a cup of tank water and pour it over the rock. And then I take the rock and I put it back in my tank, and you immediately see how much peroxide was still in the rock. You're like, oops. And all the snails go up the glass really fast. And I was like, sorry guys, I didn't mean to do that. So yes, if you're using too much of peroxide, it could affect livestock in your tank. You might see a reaction, but I didn't have things die from doing that. So, and you know, I always deal with things in small portions. I don't sit there and like take every rock out of my tank and do all of them with peroxide and then put them all in the tank, which could cause chaos. I was dealing with a frag tank that was really small, and I took one rock out that I wanted to deal with a specific problem, handled that problem, put that one rock back, and moved on with my life. And I think that if we work gradually through the tank over a period of days, a little piece here, a little piece there, a little piece there, day after day after day, after 7 or 14 days, you can accomplish a lot, rather than making today is the day I attack the reef, and you do 900 things. Then livestock tends to react not so well because so many changes, so much stress, so much chemical interaction. Brian, thank you very much for the super chat. He said, I can't thank you enough for these streams on Saturday. We love the content. I'm going to make a Facebook page just for you on the Facebook group. Awesome. Yep, that'd be great. Love to see you over there. Ari says, when dosing peroxide, it is recommended you pour it into the skimmer. It depletes the oxygen when dumped right in the tank. I have not seen that. I've put it straight in the tank when I did it, and I saw no change. I don't know that putting in the skimmer would be beneficial. I think if anything, you might export it as quick as it got in. So it doesn't really help. I'm trying to target the area that's being infested with dinos. Oh, thank you. Mitch says, backyard freshwater ponds also have dinoflagellate blooms. Most often, people will use copper ionizers in an effort to completely eliminate all algae. Biodiversity prevents dinos. Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, can't you really use a copper ionizer, can we? But yeah, that's good to know. Let's see. Jamie says, is there any product on the market that can be added to dose calcium, alkaline, and magnesium all at once? I have a single dose pump. Kane? I don't know what the last part was. Maybe your name is Kane. No, your name is Jamie. I don't know what's happening here. Not that I'm aware of. I've seen some things where people do some weird combinations, but usually it's best to dose each one separately to get the right ratio. Initially, you might say I'm putting in like 4 milliliters of each one of these every day, and then you discover, oh, I need like 20 times as much for magnesium, and I need less alkaline, I need more calcium, or I have I need more alkalinity, my calcium is topped off, I barely need to dose that at all. If you were to combine them all, you might have a chemical interaction. You could even have precipitation to where the alkaline and the calcium interact and it turns into snow and it just collapses at the bottom and the solution is no longer valid. I mean, you can Google and see if there's anything available on the market. I'm sure someone has made an all-in-one bottle, but generally we like to just have our additives in separate amounts. Back in the day, before we had the DIY 2-part dosing, people really relied on kalkwasser, which would maintain their alkaline and their calcium with their top off, or with just a direct dose of kalkwasser. Kalkwasser, though, has a pH of 12, which is very dangerous to your tank if it all goes in at once. And so I always tell people, be super careful with kalkwasser. If you choose to do that, you will be taking care of alkaline and calcium on a daily basis via top off. But the problem is, especially this time of year when the weather isn't quite hot, and then it is hot, and then it's cold, and it's just like it's all over the place. And one day you might top off 2 gallons, the next day you top off 1/4 gallon, the next day you top off 1 gallon. And so think of that as how much alkaline you dosed one day when a whole bunch went in versus how little you put in on a day when barely any went in. That's a real problem, and it's very hard to keep a good balance when it keeps fluctuating. So I actually would prefer to see people take kalkwasser, mix up the solution, let it settle, pour the middle, the liquid, not the slurry at the bottom, not the skin at the top, get everything in between, put that in a separate container, and dose just that amount into their tank with a dosing pump, and then refill it once a day, which no one's going to do. But that's the safest way, because if you hook up just what your tank needs, like in my tank, maybe my tank needs 1 gallon. If I were to make up like 5 gallons of kalkwasser or 45 gallons of it or something like that, and then I siphoned 1 gallon into a container that my dosing pump could add at night while I'm asleep, there's nothing that can go wrong. I'm planning to put in 1 gallon. 1 gallon went in, no problem. Now, if I hook up the dosing pump to the 45-gallon barrel and 45 gallons goes in, that would be the end of the tank behind me. So I don't take those kind of chances. And then when it comes to magnesium, you just need to dose it occasionally. The nice thing about magnesium is once it's up, it stays up for a long, long time. It's not something you have to dose for the rest of your life. My tank uses a lot of magnesium. I've been putting in something like 70 milliliters a day. But I remember with my 280, I could pour in like a 2-liter bottle, and then I was good for months. And then I poured in a 2-liter bottle. And that was because we didn't have dosing pumps like that. You know, we just had to trickle it in. Because I had so much water volume, I could just pour it in, and I just watched the cloudy water move to the return pump and send it in the reef, and all my corals were just booming. Ah, he meant Camor, not Kane. Michael says, I'd like to keep a simple tank with a bubble tip anemone and a clownfish pair. I'm thinking Clarkie because they are naturally hosted by the bubble tips, but I'm worried that an Ocellaris or a perk might not live inside the anemone. No, any of those will. The Clarkie, though, it's kind of a bulldog fish, and it may bite you. So your simple tank might be kind of aggressive, making it hard to clean. Ocellaris will, Perculas definitely will. They all like bubble tip anemones. That's not a problem. So just pick a pair that you like and enjoy your tank. Rob's Reef says, at what point are phosphates too low? What's the ideal level? 0 is too low, even though a decade ago we all wanted 0. And ideally 0.03 to 0.08 is somewhere in that area. My tank tends to be 0.1 or higher on a regular basis, and I just knock it back down. It has gotten higher. It's been 0.75. But I don't have algae problems in my tank for whatever reason. I can't really explain why that is. I have really good filtration, possibly, but I don't really have a lot of fish that are like known algae consumers, and I never see them just like working the rock nonstop. I don't know, but I just don't. You know, when I have higher phosphates, I see more algae on the glass rather than hair algae or something growing on the rockwork. So I do knock it down with Phosphate RX. But currently, I haven't tested yet today, so I need to see what my levels are for now. Someone said, let's start a Mark's touched his face counter. Stop it. Kevin James says, I just got back from the fish store and they gave me cordon ick attack along with Sarah snails and a 6-line wrasse. They steered me away from Vibrant, Microbacter 7. Your scraping idea is too difficult. Scraping? You mean plucking? Yeah, it's not fun. It makes your back hurt, but pulling off hair algae, 1 pinch at a time is what I recommend. But ick attack is for ick, and that has nothing to do with handling algae problems. I'm not really sure where you're going with this one, but good luck with your tank. Scratchy Chan says, I'm carbon dosing and I'm getting burnt tips. My alkaline is 8.4, nitrate 25, phosphate 0.05. I thought with nutrients in the tank there shouldn't be burnt tips. Well, when you're carbon dosing, your water tends to get more clear. And as the water becomes more clear, you have better light penetration, which can burn the tips of some acros. It's one of the reasons why people started lower their alkalinity even lower, like 7 DKH, to avoid the burnt tips. I never did that. I love alkalinity. Somewhere between 8 and 11, that's, I have no problem keeping it at 11. And I did carbon dose. I used vodka dosing for 3 years. When I had any tips of an acropore burn, what I did was I took bone cutters and I cut off each tip and I put a drop of glue on each tip, and that allowed the coral to heal and not have algae growth there. Now, behind me, you can't see it, but in this big acro back here, where the random flow generators are shooting water, the tips are kind of hideous looking, and there's like algae was growing inside those areas. And really the solution is to snip it off, and I just haven't got my hand wet. But since I knocked down all the phosphate out of the system with Phosphate RX recently, now they're just hideous looking branches with no algae in them. So to clean up a tank is to trim those off and put a drop of glue on each one, and the coral will grow over the glue, and it'll look great again. But I would think it's because you're having better penetration, you're having more intense light, and if you're running your lights a little too long, that could be it. But I don't think your alkaline at the level you said, being 8.4, is really going to be a problem for burning tips. Be careful too how you dose it. You want to make sure you're dosing an area of very high flow, so it doesn't just come in as a cloud of vodka or whatever carbon you're using to dose your tank. Mass says, wouldn't it be nice if you had magnetic panels in front of your sump area? That may happen this year. Who knows, I might be stuck at home. Thank you very much. Yeah, I like this shirt. It's the Why Squid. It's a fun little shirt. Did you ever reveal your new silicone O-ring product experiment? Oh, are you talking about what I sprayed on the drive shaft of the Camor dosing pump? Is that what you mean? I use something that's used for machinery. I use it specifically to lubricate parts of Minion so that she operates well and doesn't rust. And I thought, man, this stuff is really cool. I'm going to try it on the Camor and quiet this thing down. And I did. I quieted down the thing so much I could totally hear the motor that makes it run. So I didn't really reveal it because I wasn't sure if it was going to cause problems to the silicone tubing. It wasn't designed for the O-rings themselves. I actually really like silicone grease. And you can get that almost everywhere. Well, Home Depot, Lowe's, Amazon. It comes in either like a Carmex container, you flip the lid open, or it comes in like a little tiny tube, like an itty-bitty toothpaste tube. And you can apply it to your O-rings whenever you take apart a union or when you're taking apart a pump and kind of lubricate the rings so that they'll last longer and not crack and break. Macy's Daddy says, can you scrub the rock with dinoflagellates or does that just spread it? It spreads it. Scrubbing the rock makes anything you scrub spread. Plus there's a risk of you inhaling it because you're aerosolizing it. So I don't ever recommend scrubbing about anything. I'll have to Google this one because I don't know what they're asking me. Please stand by. It might be something I know but didn't know it was called that. Okay, so the question was, any tips about Lingbia? I've been trying to kill it for months, but it seems to come back with a vengeance. So I'm looking at it in Google. I'm thinking I'm looking at a plant, like leaves. I don't know. I don't know the answer to this. I'm not familiar with that term, sorry. Maybe I'm used to a different common name, but I'll have to look it up and see what that is. That's news to me. Sorry. David says, what's the strangest thing that Spock likes to eat? Strangest thing. Well, people get a kick out of her eating banana, which I like to do. She will eat bubble algae right off of something I'm holding in my hand. And when I scrape the glass, especially near the top, it'll chip off whatever that weird algae that grows along the perimeter of the tank. I knock that off and she chases down, eats all of that. She'll also eat coralline algae as I'm scraping this wall. So she likes that. I don't know if those are weird things, but she definitely likes them. Scott says, next weekend I'm planning to rip my aquascape apart, power wash the rock, then rescape. My fish store says it's the best way. Power washing rock issues. Yes, the risk is you may inhale stuff that comes off the rock because you're blasting it and everything is becoming mist and you're surrounded by it and you're breathing it. So I would say at the very least you should have on a face mask, not because of other reasons, but just because you don't want to inhale that stuff. The live rock we were getting from Fiji back in the day was being power washed there after they took it out of the ocean. So they made the rock, they put it in the ocean, they cooked it in the ocean, they flipped it, they made it look beautiful, they brought it back onto land, they power washed it to knock off all the good guys, and you ended up with just clean rock that was then shipped in big boxes, like 55 pounds at a time. And you go to your fish store and you'd buy a box or two of this rinsed live rock. And that was, but see, you're not going to inhale anything at that point because you aren't near the source of where they did the work. When you do this, you may put yourself and your respiratory system at risk slightly. So I'm not a big fan of it, but you know, I understand the mentality. Just be careful, and I hope that this works out for you. Jason says, is ORP worth monitoring? I was thinking about using that port as my second pH probe for my calcium reactor, or should I buy the PM1? ORP is sort of one of those numbers you ignore except when it goes haywire. So it's sort of like a canary in the coal mine. And when the number suddenly plummets, you're like, hey, something's wrong with my tank, and you really start investigating. But if you want to remove that and use it as the secondary pH probe, you definitely can. I've always had an ORP probe. I don't rely on it, but there's been a couple of times where it saved my tank. You know, something weird happened. I was like, what is going on? And ORP had plummeted, and I was able to resolve the issue. Okay, that's weird. Half my computer is frozen. So I can figure out what's going on here. Wow, everything's frozen. I don't even know if we're connected. Well, that might be the end of this stream. All right. Sorry, guys. Maybe I can come right back. We'll see.